Welcome back to the Life on the Wrist podcast. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about watch movements and how they are constructed. Now, I know that you've probably heard terms about in-house movements and mass-produced movements. Maybe you've heard of ETA, value, and today I wanted to talk about sort of like where watchmaking was originally. If you go back, maybe let's say, if we go back maybe, 50, 60, 70 years ago, I want to talk about how watch movements were sort of used and utilized by some of the big players in the industry, and then sort of compare and contrast it to what's going on today with how people view watch movements and watch movement construction by some of the brands that they love and watch houses that they love. So the reason why I'm thinking about this topic is John Goldberger, Aro Montanari did his, about a month ago, Hodinky did a part 2 of Talking Watches with him. And something that was really cool is he actually brought 3 pocket watches, one from one from Patek Philippe, one from Audemars Piguet, and then I believe one from Cartier. And each of them had the same base movement that was produced. They were shipped to each of the manufacturers, and the manufacturers made some modifications to it to make it their own movement. But that was really the way that watch movements were bought and modified by watch companies, where there'd be a big house who would sell watch movements to, or be requested to make watch movements for a specific brand, and they would ship them to the brands to make the modifications. And so when they were talking about this, I immediately thought of this really beautiful Vacheron Constantin reference 6290 from the 1950s that I have covered on the channel. And the watch runs on a caliber called the caliber 1003. And if you look at our article, we sort of talk about, and I'll put a link in the show notes to the article so you can read about it. But the watch, the specific caliber was developed. It started to be developed in 1952, and 3 years later, it was presented in 1955. And this was a watch movement that they requested be created by Jaeger LeCoultre or JLC. But they were not the only brand who requested this watch movement or a movement like this to be produced. Audemars Piguet was another brand who requested this movement. And so I thought the Vacheron was a good kind of watch to talk through about how this sort of relates. So let's say we're in the 1950s and I'm a watch manufacturer and I want to produce a movement. I want to have a movement that's has specific, thinness or specific size. I would go to a movement maker like Jaeger LeCoultre, who manufactured movements for many of the big brands, and you would request that movement be produced. And so that's what Vacheron Constantin and Audemars Piguet did. They requested a movement similar to, with the specific specifications, and Jaeger LeCoultre produced the caliber 803, which they actually, I don't believe, used in any of their pieces, but they sold to Vacheron Constantin and Audemars Piguet. And so with this movement, Vacheron Constantin made modifications to it, did some decorating of the movement, and produced their caliber 1003 manual wind movement, which is a phenomenally finished movement, really beautiful to look at. There's a picture on Instagram. I'll see if I can find a link to it so you can see what it looks like on this specific 6290, because it really is a beautiful movement. But as I mentioned, Audemars Piguet also requested that this movement be sold to them, and they created the caliber 2003. So very similar movement, or the same movement construction, just finished a little bit differently for the Audemars Piguet watches. And so what you often find is very, very similar watches of the 1950s or 40s, 50s, 60s, where they use very movements that look very similar to one another, may be called something different, but in essence have the same base movement. And what's really interesting is it even goes so far as where the cases of the watches that these movements are housed in look very, very similar. So I was recently just looking at some old auction catalogs, and I saw a Audemars Piguet, I'm forgetting the reference, but it had a caliber 2003 movement in it, and it had a square white gold case. And what's really cool about that is the 6290 from Vacheron Constantin also has a square 26 by 26 millimeter white gold case. And so I'm not sure who actually produced the cases, but I can imagine that these cases were produced by the same manufacturer, and Audemars Piguet and Vacheron Constantin both asked for the cases to be delivered for this specific movement that they produced. And so that's what you got. You got brands who released very similar watches with very similar movements, just finished differently according to the brand's sort of wants and needs. And today, the equivalent of that is what you would probably imagine is something like taking an ETA movement, modifying it, and putting it into a watch that your manufacturer is producing. Now, what's weird is when I say something like that, it often feels like that's sort of such a taboo topic, where watch manufacturers who take ETA movements, modify them to their specifications, or do a little bit of finishing to them, and then put them into their watch. A lot of the times people think it's kind of like ripping the consumer, ripping a client off, because the movements are relatively inexpensive to buy from these brands. Now, I think there's a whole discussion that can come through when it comes to like mass producing movements, or these movements that are produced in so many such large quantities. There's a whole discussion to be had about that, and I don't think I really want to comment on that specific thing. But what you can do, I think, is do something similar to what John Goldberger did. Take 3 watches from 3 different brands, put them side by side, and compare them, and say these all run on the ETA blah blah blah, and I'm going to compare to see which one I think was better executed, looks better, feels better, and go from there. Because I think there is some validity in looking at watches as they used to. Because I think now there's such a focus on in-house manufacturing. So they want to buy consumers or clients want to buy, and collectors want to buy watches that have been produced from A to Z within the manufacturer. They want Vacheron Constantin or Audemars Piguet to take a base idea, come up with a movement that would allow them to execute on that idea, make every single part, put the parts together, create the cases, and that's just not how it used to be done. But there's so much focus on having watches they're producing watches and buying watches and collecting watches that have in-house everything. I don't have an opinion on which way you want to collect. I think you can collect and have fun in both ways, and be just as satisfied with the watches that you have in your collection. But what I don't like is when people, not when there's snobbery around it, but just like, I think, understand that other people collect differently, and you don't have to have you don't have to only have a watch collection that has in-house movements. A really great comparator of this is the new brand that's coming out, the JCB Heuer watch brand that should be releasing a watch, I believe, in March, or a group of watches in March, where Jean-Claude Biver and his son Pierre have created a watch brand. And I've watched a couple of interviews with them, and they've sort of spoken about the movements that they're using in their pieces, and they are manufactured by a watch movement maker, but they then come in-house, and the finishing is applied to them. So it'll be really cool to see where that brand goes and see what happens with their movements, because I think everyone respects Jean-Claude Biver for everything that he's done for the watch world, the watch industry, and so for him to create a brand that does this, I think it's showing validity to this idea, and not saying that you have to have in-house everything. So yeah, I'm excited to see what they come out with and the success that they have. I'm sure that it's going to be absolutely beautiful to the watches that they end up releasing. So I think this is a really interesting topic. I'd love to talk to you guys about this, so be sure to hit us up on our website or on our Instagram, because it is a really interesting, in my opinion, really interesting topic of how, go back 70 years, watch brands did use similar movements but finished them differently and sold their pieces. And that looked very, very similar to one another. They used similar case makers. And now when watch brands do it, a lot of the times people feel like it's a cheapening of the product in some way, or they think it's not worthy of being in a collection, which I think is to me, short-sighted. Like, I think you need to be open to more than one possibility of ways of collecting. In-house movements and in-house manufacturing is incredible. And in my opinion, if you want to do something like that, you should only be collecting independent watch makers, because that's the true essence of what you're looking for in those. If you're looking for in-house manufacturing, in-house design, you go straight to independence, and you'll be able to enjoy those types of aesthetics or finishing on your piece. If you are new to the podcast, be sure to follow us, and if you wouldn't mind rating us, it really does help me out. Check out the links in the show notes. There'll be links to the talking watches, to the article about the 6290 from Vacheron Constantin. I'll also try to put a link to the image of the 6290 movement, because it really is a phenomenal shot. I took it with a Loop Systems macro lens, which is really cool. The MB&F did a collaboration with Loop Systems, the LPX rocket, and they had loops, and you actually can take the loop and attach it to your camera on your phone and take these really beautiful macro shots. I'll be covering the LPX on Wednesday on YouTube and and we'll have an article about it, so stay tuned for that if you wanted to see that. But again, back to what I was really talking about, I digress. The image of the 6290 really is beautiful, so be sure to check that out. There'll be links in the show notes to all of our social media accounts as well, so you can check us out there. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.